Say President Cyril Ramaphosa's economic advisor, Trudi Makhaya. Makhaya is an economist, consultant and former deputy commissioner at the Competition Commission. Apart from advising on policy issues, she's been mandated to oversee the drive to attract $100 billion, that's more than R1 trillion, in new investment into South Africa. And happily, she joins us in studio now. Thanks for being with us, Trudi. So, I'm sure that every economist dreams of being in your position where you can actually get the ear of the president, influence decisions hugely in this country, but now is it daunting?
It's an incredible opportunity. I think I was quite honored to have been asked to serve in this capacity. As you say, it is quite a hot seat, but obviously intellectually challenging. You know, every day brings new issues to deal with. I think given the state of our economy, there's also lots of creativity mixed with pragmatism that is needed. So it certainly is an incredible position, and I hope that we can achieve all that we set out to do.
Do you feel the weight? I mean, we have such inequality, such high unemployment, such poverty that to me, people's lives are at stake.
Absolutely. So, you know, we have these challenges and, you know, we don't want them to become entrenched. We want to put this behind us. We want to be able to say long ago we used to have 27% unemployment, but we've been able to resolve it. It's very important. You know, often economics is seen as very separate from people's lives, whereas it's actually quite integral. Once we solve some of the economic challenges, I think even the broader national issues, you know, the heat will be taken out of some of the key concerns, which are largely driven by people feeling marginalized and not being able to participate effectively in the economy.
Are you worried that all the excitement around the political changes seems to have faded a little bit when you look at the financial data? It was all looking good. Now business confidence down, retail sales, a whole lot of things, petrol going up. Is that personally disappointing to you? And it shows, I guess, that these problems are stubborn.
Yeah. So I've always been one to look at long-term trends. You know, you can't just look at one quarter's outcomes and freak out and say this is all terrible. You can't look at, you know, one GDP figure, say in the last quarter of 2017 and rejoice when you know that there are challenges. And then in the first quarter there's a downturn, plunge into a depression. Once again, you still knew there were these challenges. I think the focus should be just on solving those fundamental structural issues within the economy so that we have a healthier long-term trend. And, you know, we can cushion and absorb the volatility. Whereas now, as you say, you know, when one thing, you know, jobs are lost, you plunge households and people's livelihoods into disarray. We need to develop an economy where we are able to absorb these shocks, either that short-term movements don't have such drastic impacts on outcomes, but also that there is enough in terms of a functioning state and a functioning social safety net that people are able to have stable lives and they don't have to deal with economic insecurity, which I think often drives a lot of the challenges.
So before we get into the specifics, how do you approach things? Because we have this National Development Plan, this very big document. Some would say it's too comprehensive. What about countries, I don't know, maybe Singapore that focused on housing, or maybe you pick 2 or 3 things and actually do it? Are we trying to do too much? The national health insurance, education, a whole lot of other things, and not achieving much?
So we're a complex society, and I think a national plan does try to achieve completeness and try to address every issue. But in implementation, I think, you know, it's a long-term plan. So at different points in time, the emphasis will be on different things. So for instance, at the moment, the president has made it clear that the emphasis should be on investment and on rebuilding the infrastructure and the investment that underpins growth in the economy. So that will be the focus for now. Once one achieves that, then the next area of focus then becomes apparent, and then you focus on that issue. So I think it's important that at different points in time we have priorities. It's not that we would just change, you know, without any deep thought, but it's more that you have a plan, but you have to pick where you are in terms of your trajectory and focus on particular things. So I'm very much about focusing on key priorities. And I think the investment drive helps us to do that. because we have these challenges: unemployment, inequality, poverty, and we're saying we want to resolve them, but we need the financing and the resources to be able to fund these aspirations that we have. We don't have savings currently as a country, or a savings rate that's high enough to fund that investment. So we have to think very carefully about how we raise it, both locally from our private sector, but also internationally. And then from that often then has guided us immediately as what do we need to resolve to ensure that we get this financing that helps us address our challenges.
And are we not being too focused on foreign direct investment? I want to talk about that investment drive, sending out these envoys. But what about the data that some people cite that says you need local businesses to invest? That is much more sustainable.
Yes, absolutely. So the president's $100 billion US, I think he just gave it in dollars. No, he gave it in dollars, I think, just to speak to everyone and to international markets and to make it obviously standard. You'll get, pounds from here and euros from there. And lots of rands, lots and lots of rands. So it has to start locally. The envoys are also looking at stimulating domestic investment because that is the basis. When your local community is confident and it's investing, that sends a signal to the rest of the world that this is a market worth investing in. So we are very much engaging with domestic businesses to try and understand what are the constraints, but also what are the opportunities that they see. So I think often when we think about investment as emerging markets, we think about FDI, which is very, very important. But at the same time, you also have to think about local investment, especially for an economy like ours, which is a sophisticated emerging market. It's not as if we don't have a corporate base to work from. We have companies listed on the stock exchange. We have very large family-owned or privately held companies, and we need to tap into that because they're the ones who are domestic, are in the market, understand where the opportunities are, and can then guide international investment when it comes and become the counterparts to international investment. But you can never not have that as your basis.
So how do you unlock that investment potential?
So we've been having engagements both with organized business but also with individual businesses. And it's obvious that there are some simple things that have been lagging for a long time in terms of policy in various sectors. You can think of mining, telecoms, perhaps even agriculture, and many others, where tourism, where there are clear barriers that everybody has been talking about for the past few years, that once you resolve the visas, the spectrum, once you get those simple things, then you can have investment. I mean, they're simple in the sense that the solutions are not overly complex, but it's been very difficult to deliver those resolutions, and I think we need to focus on that.
Why? Because of politics? So because there's been a lot of political wrangling, say, around the visas?
It might be that there's also just fundamental issues around how the state coordinates and functions, almost just as a technical, bureaucratic question about how do we ensure that we balance and trade off policies, and we do that using evidence. And I think that's the capability we need to develop. So the politics can run, will never go away, but at least we have a fact base that we take decisions using those facts.
So there's the low-lying fruit, and then you deal with the what do they call the milieu in which business operates?
Yes. So there's also ongoing projects around, transaction costs in the economy. The cost of starting a business, registering, all of those ease of doing business considerations that obviously have to be improved. The state-owned corporations obviously also create the services that a lot of businesses require in terms of transport, energy, water resources. So once you resolve that, you also have, you can have greater investment. In terms of the
you don't have power cuts on a Thursday night.
We're also we will release a paper kind of setting out the themes of investment that we're pursuing. Obviously, we welcome all investment, but we will give a sense of just our bias and priority areas. But of course, if people want to invest in other areas and they see a return there, they're welcome to do so.
We have to talk about the land debate. Do you think that is partly responsible for this wavering in the financial data of late?
No, I mean, I think we do have a complex So there's domestic issues like land issue that are obviously affecting sentiment, but you also have the fact that we have a small economy. We need to grow the economy, and that will moderate some of those challenges. So it's not necessarily only about the land question. I think it's just reflecting that we have weak fundamentals generally in the economy that we need to work on. On the land issue, I think it's been clear that there are processes. Parliament is leading a process to try and understand what needs to be done in terms of the Constitution, whether it needs to be amended. If not, what's the reasoning for not amending it? There's also been a very strong argument made by many experts that if you look at the criteria set out in the Constitution, you are able to use a range of tools to acquire and facilitate land reform. And those tools include expropriation without compensation. And so I suppose, once again, we have to test whether that is indeed possible. I think, obviously, once that is resolved, that will give greater certainty. But I think it's also very important in this debate and dialogue for people to understand that expropriation without compensation will always be only one tool across a whole range of other instruments that can be brought to bear, and a whole lot of other challenges with land reform. There was a thorough process led by former President Motlanthe, which looked at many, many aspects of land reform. I think perhaps we only talk about certain aspects, but the work looked at the full range, from tenure reform, from understanding how mineral rights are negotiated with communities. All that work also needs to be done. You can have expropriation without compensation, but without resolving all of those other challenges, you won't get very far.
Well, he was here yesterday saying, in fact, he does believe that's a red herring. When there are these tools available, we can talk about expropriation. But would your advice to the president be, shut this debate down as soon as possible? Some people are saying, decide, expropriate, but tell people who will lose land, who won't. It seems in South Africa we often let debates rage on, and we talk about the importance of debates, but it goes on for so long that it creates that uncertainty that you're talking about.
On a foundational and fundamental issue like land reform, I don't think you can shut down the debate. I take your point that it should be done in a speedy manner. I think people who advocate for that position would be like, just do it and make it clear. And I think the parliamentary process has built-in deadlines that achieve that. I think it is a source of pride on some level that, there's so many submissions that are coming through. The only problem is that we shouldn't get lost in the detail and just should pick up the key themes that are emerging and quickly have a discussion with experts and also obviously the communities involved and stakeholders involved, and come to pragmatic solutions. So it can't go on for too long. At the same time, I feel like on something like land, you also don't want to take the risk of shutting it down and not resolving it and have greater social problems down the line.
Final question. So if we fix things, how big can we dream economically? What do you see for a South Africa where we actually get our ducks in a row, put politics aside, work with the data, and do things quickly?
I think we would need to crack the challenge where even in the past when we've had growth, we also had employment growth, but that employment growth was not enough to absorb the great number of people who are out of work. So I would want to see jobs that also marries, growth that comes with job creation, and that's also inclusive. I think that is the key theme going forward, that we will have an economy that's growing at far faster rates than what we have at the moment, but that it doesn't leave anyone behind, and that we creatively and actively think about crafting ways to ensure that that growth and even the investment that we're raising delivers, across the board and doesn't perpetuate the inequality that we see, for instance.
Which opens up the whole debate of robots, but hopefully we can chat to you in future. And thank you for outlining some of your ideas. That was President Cyril Ramaphosa's economic advisor, Trudi Makhaya.